bright faces now, just bright, cheery faces the whole time. Hey, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. It's the 25th of January. It's a Wednesday, and we like to give a little extra focus to the role that faith plays in bringing about the common good in our world, because, you know, we want to help all people, but especially faith voters, to figure out how to separate their identities, their political identity and their faith identity when necessary, if they feel like the commitment to one holds them back from the other. So that's what we do around here. And on our YouTube channel, this goes live, and we hope that if you're watching it anywhere, you'd be watching it over on our YouTube channel, and, you know, give us all the things you're supposed to do over there, likes and follows and all that. But it chooses some frame from the video to put up, you know, when it's live, as the standing sort of thumbnail. And for whatever, maybe it's just because we're always making ugly faces, but it's just amazing how the faces that we have, any of us who are on here,
just really capturing our essence.
Yeah, really
awkward.
Awkward people. So good morning to you, Dan. Good morning to you, Austin Marsman, who's joining us from West Michigan. Good to see you.
Hey, that's where I'm at too. I'm down in the Stevensville, St. Joe area, right on the lake.
Hey, you two ought to hook up for lunch today. You know,
Yeah.
a little lunch meeting. Back in the old world before COVID, and when I was a pastor, and I had a lot of like just regular meetings. Like I'd get up and be like, no, I'm meeting somebody at this coffee shop. I'm meeting somebody at this lunch. I have this Tuesday breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
Since partially leaving that job, and then COVID, I just stay in my basement and think,
Yeah.
did I shower yesterday? Or I think so.
Yeah.
So
I don't get out much.
It's really something, isn't it? Like, I don't know. Maybe it's just us. Maybe it's not everybody. But how is the weather there in West Michigan, by the way?
We've got a few inches of snow now. So
all right, congratulations, cleaning it up.
Yeah, we're supposed to get maybe 6 inches and a few more inches of lake effect snow tomorrow. So we'll see.
Okay. Well, good luck to you on the icing and shoveling.
Yeah.
And
we've got snow tubes. A lot of people are into sledding, but that's not as smooth a ride as the snow tubes. So the kids have a bunch of tubes, inflatable inner tubes that you glide down the hills with. Yeah,
it's luxury. It's the luxury SUV of going down a hill.
Yep.
The inner tubes. Yeah, the kids are already chomping at the let's get out there today, after school.
A little bummed that it wasn't a snow day, but
okay.
But they don't even really do snow days now. It just transitions to an e-learning day, which is like, what's the point?
Right. It's like a snow day, but you don't have to add it on to the end of the school year. I don't know if you get too many of them. Are your kids the type that are like, Dad, you have to come out with us? You've got to get out in snow hill with us?
Totally, yep.
Yeah.
Fun story, I actually broke a rib trying to be the cool dad a couple winters ago.
Yeah?
We had these Snurf boards. You're familiar with Snurf boards? They're like the original snowboards. It's just like a wooden ski with a rope at the nose, and you glide down the hill on it. It's just like staples on the top to make your feet sort of stick to the top of it. Yeah. And you just let it rip, And I was like, I still got it. I'll hop on this and show the kids how it's done. I go down this hill, hit the smallest of bumps, and just spill, land wrong, and cracked a rib. Like,
oh my Lord. Couldn't breathe for a month.
Yeah.
No deep breaths.
So bad. The kids were like, Dad, what's wrong with you? Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Wasn't that cool?
It hurts. I'm all right. A broken rib it is a real thing. That is, you're glad it's protecting your lungs, because that would be the end of you. But man, you get that just a little out of place or something, and
hurts to breathe for like 3 weeks. Yeah.
Yes, it is stunning. It is really a complex system. Hey, and hello there to Ruth. Good to see you here. Hey, today on the faith themed podcast, I'm gonna share a video that I actually recorded yesterday with Denise McGraw and Professor Howard Horton. They run this really great little kind of TV show thing. It's really, really excellent. Once a week. Hope you'll maybe make it a part of your regular viewing. It's called Community Conversations, and they really talk about the effects of diversity and equality and inclusion and allyship and how people can be engaged. They do this particular work out of Albany, New York. And they were kind enough to ask me to come on and talk about Vote Common Good, partly because Denise has traveled with us on the Vote Common Good bus. She's a bussy. She's a roadie. And she also helped to start, along with Patrick Carolyn, the expression of Vote Common Good that is specifically designed for Catholics. It's called Catholics Vote Common Good. And it was important to create an effort that had Catholic in it, because so many people's faith, the way we think about our faith in the United States tends to be with really important descriptors and adjectives. You're not just Christian, or you're not just faithful or something. You're a particular type. So you might be a Catholic, or you might be a Protestant, or you might be a Presbyterian, or you might think of yourself as an evangelical or as a spiritual but not religious. Like, there's some qualifier that's in there. And those identity markers are really important for people. So our effort of Catholics Vote Common Good is the same stuff we do all around, but want to be sure we're inviting Catholics anyway. And Denise has done a great job of organizing all that work. So it's a bit of an insider conversation that we had over on this other project that she's up to. It's other things she has going on. So it was really, really quite a fun conversation. And I thought that what came out of it would be super interesting for other people to listen to, because so often on this podcast and live stream, we don't often talk about the origins of Vote Common Good, how and why we got started, what we're really do. Like, we're not describing what we're doing around here. We're just doing it, right? So I thought it might be interesting for you to hear these descriptions of what we're doing. Our organization has a chance to talk about what we do with a lot of different groups. We're on a variety of podcasts. We're in news articles. We're talking to organizations about what we do. And it struck me that so often people in those settings get this like clear, distilled sort of explanation about what we're up to and how this all came about and what the role of Christianity plays in Vote Common Good and Christian voters and faith voters of all varieties and all this stuff. But then people who are on the receiving end of a lot of our content don't often get that kind of a description, because we're busy doing it. You know what I mean, Dan? I mean, it's kind of a curious thing, right? That the more experiential side is what people who are in our stream get, and the more distilled explanatory side is what other people get. And I think the two really go well together. So we thought thought today we'd show you that conversation, and maybe you'll find that helpful as you sort of describe to yourself and others, hey, what is Vote Common Good, and what are they up to, and what is it that they're doing? So
yeah, I think we assume that people have been with us from the start and kind of know what we're up to, but folks are finding us every day on YouTube or Facebook or the different pages we're at. And so, I think this is a great catch you up to speed episode of how did we get started? Why did we get started? What is it we do? And why do we do it?
Yeah. And it's also interesting because what Denise and the doctor are doing on this show is they're talking about, the role of diversity and equity and inclusion and allyship. And so many of the things that we do at Vote Common Good come out of that same work. Dr. Horton does work, he'll talk about this in the podcast that we'll show, or in the video that we'll show, but he does work in community development. And that's a language set that operates inside of a certain social engagement sector of society. We also do community development work, but we don't tend to call it that. We use a different set of terms and descriptors for, what we're up to and what we're doing. But they're very similar projects and very similar activities. So that becomes a part of it. And I think people will like the conversation, I hope, and will certainly like Denise and Dr. Horton, and think that you'll find some really strong value in it. So you can find all of this over at their page. I need to sort of get that up. If you search for community conversations on the social media places, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and allyship, and we'll put this in the notes here on the thing. So down below, after the podcast is up and the YouTube channel is up, you have a chance to find what they do. They do it every Tuesday. I think it actually goes out on public access television.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you remember watching Saturday Night Live back when they had, Wayne's World on, and it was,
Oh yeah.
community television, and that is so lodged in my brain that many days I try to think that's not what we're doing here. This is not Wayne's World. We're doing this on the internet and streaming, on Twitch. We're not just on some community
Local access.
yeah, but we
If
really
this
should be
were
on
Wayne's
local
World, I
access.
would love it. Yeah.
Yeah, we should find some way to get on local access. You could just reach behind you there, grab that cherry red guitar,
Right.
and
Wayne's
hit
World, Wayne's World.
Really something. Okay, so do you think we need any more explanation? Do you think we need any more?
Denise says, "Party time, excellent." That's me.
Oh, and there's Denise right there.
Yeah.
I mean, how meta is this? Now, Denise is going to be in the comments
commenting about a video where she's interviewing you. It's a lot.
What
and also, hello to Dora. Hey, Dora.
Dora, if any of you have watched our documentary pieces for the documentary we were making about the border, Dora is one of our participants in that. She traveled with us, is one of the speakers. Dora Rodriguez is one of the best that you'll ever know. So hi, Dora. Good to see you. Hope all is well. And we're coming back to see you, Dora. And by the way, friends, we are going to be heading back to the border. That's our plan anyway. So some details coming together on that pretty soon. Hey, if I mentioned the use of the phrase "without further ado," have I given you my thing?
No.
So I don't know why in podcasts and YouTube videos, of which I consume a lot, when people are setting up something that's about to happen, they will use this phrase, without further ado. Mm-hmm. And it's the only time I ever hear that phrase. Like somehow it's like, first of all, who's whipping out the French? And secondly, like, why does it seem like it's something you would say when you're hosting a video or an audio stream? Do you hear it too?
Well, I have said it, and I was even scripting out an intro for a podcast the other day, and I was like, I wrote it out, and I was like, that's so weird to say. I can't say that. So I changed it to something else, but the temptation is just lodged there. Like, that's what you say when you're introducing something. So.
Yes, it's really, I mean, nowhere else.
It's the only time you say it.
Yeah, nowhere else in my life I've introduced a lot of things, and never have I said, without further ado.
There's don't
not even
much
know technically what that word
before
means.
That.
Yeah. And I just about said it here, without further ado. And then had to catch myself, like, no, don't fall into the ado trap. This is ado nonsense. All right. So here's the conversation with Denise McGraw and Professor Dr. Howard Horton on the community conversations about diversity, equality, inclusion, and allyship from that's out of the the Albany, New York area, and I think the Capital District of New York is what they call it. So anyway, that's all those pieces. So thank you, Denise, for being here today. Thanks for the conversation yesterday. And without further ado, here we go. Dan, I don't hear her lovely voice.
1 second.
I don't know if you hear my voice. Sorry about this, friends. It is the beauty of live streaming, though, and we should just leave it in for the podcast people so that they can experience all the glory that is this as well.
Yeah. What?
All right, Dan will spend a little bit of time here getting that side figured out. I will.
Maybe if you could give some further ado, actually, just a little more.
I was just gonna fill your ado bucket and ado you up. One of the things we don't talk about in this interview is how the work that we do at Vote Common Good makes a whole lot of sense and has been going on in different sectors of the faith and civic life world for a long time. In more conservative spaces, it happens a lot. There's a number of organizations like Vote Common Good. There's a number of groups that do the kinds of things that we do, and they do this in the conservative spaces all the time. The internet is full of them. There are multiple channels. There's television, many television channels on different networks and all. A lot of that going on. On the not so conservative side, there's some work going on in faith and civic engagement through the political lens in some churches, especially in the historic African-American churches. There's a significant amount of this work that goes on. In the not African-American churches, there's not nearly as much that goes on that's not conservative. There's only a few organizations and very few that are doing aggressive media outreach around this kind of work. And we think that's super important. That's one of the reasons why, if you're on our email list, and if you're not yet on our email list, we'd like you to be on it. You can go to votecommongood.com and sign up for it. We're sending out inquiries of people who want help producing their own podcasts and media. So if that's something you're looking to do, we're looking to help you. And we'd like to help you to make that happen, because we think we need to turn up the volume on common good advocacy that happens in public spaces. And partly that volume is make things louder. And the other is to just use volume in the other way to turn up the amount of offerings that are available, how much of it is available to people and so on. So we'd love for you to have your own stream and podcast, and then you get the glories of having the audio not work right when you needed it to. There's just nothing more exhilarating and refreshing than that. Did you get it?
Can you hear that?
Hello.
We got it, baby.
All right.
Edition of Community Conversations.
We'll see everybody.
Production of the
thanks all. Now I lost it again, Dan. Now we lost it. As soon as it goes live, or as soon as it goes screen forward.
Oh, weird.
Isn't that something? Boy, there's a trick. There's a trick. There's a trick to be had. I wonder what's
what is going on? When I screen share, it goes away.
Yeah.
I still hear it.
You hear it on your end.
Why is it doing it just for that?
I don't know. It's not the Mixamize? Hey, I'll just tell you, people have often said to us, "Hey, you guys' production quality looks great around there. Like, what do you use for the?" Well, there's all kinds of noise now. What do you use? I won't brag about the audio interface at this particular moment, but if you're wondering about the rest of
this incredible work,
well, you guys seem like you really got a top-notch system going on there. How do you get your videos not to play when they're supposed to? We use a system here called Ecamm, and that's what.
Week. Hi there, Doc. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
Can you
Denise,
hear
how
that?
about yourself?
Got it, baby.
Okay.
Right.
So
Well,
I was joking.
I'll stop the ado and
started,
finish this up later.
This
There's
is
Denise.
a first for us.
Here comes
we have
Doc.
A guest that we
And
haven't
here we
had
go.
before.
Enjoy.
He's somebody that I've been working with for a little while now. I've admired his work for a long time, and then finally, got in on it. Doug Pagitt is the executive director of and the founder of Vote Common Good, that's how I know him. But like a lot of people on this show and us too, he wears a lot of hats, literally and figuratively. He is a pastor. He is an author of 10 books, Doug?
Yeah, 10 books you've never heard of. Yeah.
There we go. Well, it's 10 more than I've written. Doc has a number 2. I got to get in. I have to start writing, I guess.
Sure.
And he's just done extraordinary work throughout the country on the kind of things that we talk about each week at this show, which is raising up all voices, batting back forces of hate that are just too prevalent in our society, in our politics, in our discourse. So I got to know him. He does a number of cool things, including taking a bus across the country and getting good people elected. I have been on that bus and I intend on getting on that bus again. I am on the bus permanently.
That's right.
But I want to welcome Pastor Doug Pagitt. How are you today, Doug?
Well, I'm very good. Thank you. And Doc and Denise, so good to be with you. This is really, really an honor and exciting. Thanks.
Well, thank you for being here. Well, Doug, the way we like to start is We like for our viewers to get to have a sense of how our guests became
Hmm.
who they are. And so can you take us back just a little bit? Tell us how you became the great Doug
Yeah,
Doug
yeah,
Pagitt.
sure, sure. I'm from Minnesota. That's where I live now. Grew up here and have lived here almost all of my life. And I grew up in a family that didn't have any religious orientation at all. We never went to church. We didn't talk about church. I never felt like I was skipping church on Sunday. I had no orientation to that religious world at all. But then when I was a teenager, um, I became a Christian through the influence of a friend, and this was in the early 1980s. And there was this little sliver of Christianity at that time, at least where I was, that were these generous, kind, inclusive evangelicals. They were the kind that, were sort of thought of when you thought of Jimmy Carter as being an
Mm-hmm.
evangelical
Mm-hmm.
president, that kind of person. And so I fell in with that group. And the story of Christianity became really interesting to me. It kind of fit my life and fit where I was, and I got in deep. So I found myself inside the Christian world. Ended up going to a Christian college, really to play basketball there.
Mm-hmm.
I was a basketball, and I didn't know there were Christian colleges. Like if you don't grow up in that sort of subculture of the
Right.
world, you might not know how all this stuff works. I wasn't even thinking about college at all. But then ended up being around the people that were associated with that college and here in Minnesota. And um, the kind of world that I grew up in was a world full of people who were outcasts and left behind and let down, people for whom the system didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in an apartment complex. We had there were a lot of people who were new to the country. There were a lot of people who were set aside for some reason, divorced women, gay men, transgender people living in this apartment complex. And so that was just sort of the world that I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed to me that the Christianity that I was introduced to was a really good news to all those people, right? It was kind of a Christianity for the left out and the left behind and the let down. So that was my original story into the faith. And then I went off to college and seminary and realized, boy, not everybody thinks about Christianity like that at all. There's a lot of people for whom their Christianity is not seen as an inclusive force to make society better and to deal with the societal and racial and justice issues, but rather it's a participant in the harmful side of so many of those issues. So I found myself both highly engaged in my Christian faith and at odds with it sort of right from the beginning.
Right.
Interesting. And so now you're becoming a Christian and certainly now a pastor. Obviously, there were a lot of challenges, perhaps even some pushback that you experienced. Why don't you share those challenges with us?
Yeah, when you're not when you're not raised inside of a particular tradition, you're for a long time seen as an outsider, right? And I thought that was okay. I thought it was actually a pretty good place to be in the Christian life and experience. And sometimes people see outsiders as intriguing, and sometimes they see them as dangerous. And I tried to stay away from the people who saw outsiders as dangerous and tried to find the people who saw folks from different experiences and backgrounds to be interesting and to be intriguing. And because I believed, and this didn't really come from my Christianity, I think I don't know, it was just sort of up in my world somehow, that we are supposed to help change the systems and structures and dynamics of the world so that more and more people don't have to be afraid and feel like they have enough. And those kinds of themes just ran through all the conversations I was having. The way I read the Bible kept showing me that was the theme of the Christian text and of the Jewish text and of the Christian history. Like that was the way it was supposed to be. So when I would run into people who had much more stake in the game, they were long-term members, they were pastors of churches, they were seminary professors, whatever. Like they were just people that were deeply inside the system. I didn't feel like this was a religion or a movement of spirituality, Christianity, I'm going to talk about here, that it was something that was owned by those people.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of felt like all of us. I don't know, like somehow I got into some early version of, the people's history of Christianity, and I was like, hey, there's a way to think about this story that is designed to help us leave behind our biases, to leave behind our separations, and to so I was as much the agitator in my world as the one being pushed against, right? People are like, that guy's kind of a pain in the,
I understand.
And I didn't mind that. I felt like that role was important. That's ultimately what got me into Vote Common Good. And then I was pastoring a church for a really long time and trying to help.
Will you talk about that a little bit before we get into Vote Common Good? It's not every day that you meet people who have taken their life to that next point, which is being the pastor of a church. We see a lot of people now who are pastors, are rabbis, are priests. They talk a lot about not hating each other and anti-racism and all this stuff. But, when push comes to shove, they're not the people in the front line. Doug, you're living it. And so how did you get to like being a pastor and then to Vote Common Good?
Well, I assumed that if there was going to be a kind of church that I thought should exist in order to embody and carry and push forward this narrative and notion, if these kinds of churches were going to exist, somebody had to make them.
Yeah.
I studied anthropology and sociology in college, and that world allowed me to recognize that human systems and structures are created by people. When you start doing sociology and you do ethnographic research and you start hearing stories, you realize things don't just exist. Like there's a few things, I guess, in nature that are just here. There's forces that are alive and well. But all the rest of the stuff that we're involved in, it has people's fingerprints all over it. Like it's not a whodunit. We know who makes the systems and structures that we have, and there's people, and you can talk to them and they'll tell you why they made things and how they built them, and people made it. So I always assume two things. One, if people made it, then people can change it. Right. And if we don't change it, whether that's our laws or our system or our structures or our habits or our behaviors, then that's a choice we're making at some level. Right. And it we might not have full agency, but it's something that we are culpable of. Our DNA is all over this crime scene. Right. So if we made it, we can change it, and we can make it. So I came from the kind of world that was just full of entrepreneurs, and, in the evangelical subset of Christianity, people just start things all the time. They form organizations, they start churches. When I was hanging around my Catholic friends who were, studying to be priests there, and I was telling, I was working on starting churches, and they would be working in other spaces like college ministries at campuses and doing very similar kind of work, right? Yeah. But I was like, no, I'm going to start a church. And they would just smirk and be like, yeah, you Protestants, you can't just start a church. Like
that is what I think when I hear that.
Like the church exists, right? So when I'm around those people, I say, well, we're starting a congregation, right? We're starting an outpost. We're starting one of the places, right? So you begin to realize, well, there's all this different language. There's all these different ways that we frame this. And they're all great and they're all helpful. And we really need one another's perspectives and accents on this in order to understand more deeply what it is that we're talking about. So I just thought we should start churches. In the world that I was in, it was all entrepreneurial startup stuff. You started with no money, you rallied up a group of people. We had a lot of people in their early 20s and college-aged people. I was 30, 31 or something like that. And pastors, by the way, tend to start and lead churches within 10 years of either side of their age. So one of the things that you see when you go into churches is you find the primary leaders and you look 10 years, maybe 15 years either side of them, and that's going to be the makeup of the congregation. This just tends to be a truism in church work really all around the world, actually. So I was about 30, 31. So I had a church with a lot of people in their 20s, a few people up into their 40s. I was there for 20 years. So, we just all got
all together. Yeah.
But and we were starting it with what we had. Like we were house-made, kind of place. We weren't starting weren't starting a franchise. We weren't opening another Chipotle. So we weren't doing a Presbyterian version. Like, it was just made stuff. So we made our own music, we made our own art, we made up our own sermons, we made up our own systems and structures, and trying to create something that looked more like the dream that we had for the way the world would operate. We got a lot of pushback. We involved everybody in all ways, in leadership and stuff. Unless there was some reason a person wasn't safe for the community, we just involved everybody. So it didn't even matter if you held the same belief that we held, if you wanted to be part of this community, right? So we're starting this Christian church with everybody participating and doing so. So that was a kind of democratized version of Christian spirituality in the early 2000s, and I was working in that area for a long time. So that's what I was up to. And in a lot of ways, the work I do in Vote Common Good and politics and all is really an extension of that same thing. Like, to me, it's the same impulse. If someone were mixing if all this stuff that I did back then was music and we were in a dance club and someone were mixing the early 2000s music, they could end up into the 2023 music, right? It would sound different, and it is different. I'm not pastoring in that specific way anymore, but it really is about the same kind of impulses inside of a different setting. So to me, it all sort of moves together. For other people, it's separate photos. Tell me about this picture, tell me about this picture. And to me, it's a moving film that just moves from one to the other.
So it's interesting that you put it that way, because when you were talking about your congregation, your church, and the music, and that to me was what my experience of being on the bus and being part of Vote Common Good was. The music plays an enormous part of what you're doing out there on the road, and and engaging a lot of different voices and a lot of different folks who may have different perspectives in some aspects, right? On the edges, we might like do things a little differently, but at the end of the day, I always felt like the folks on the bus and people who are part of all this had the same heart, had the same big vision of where we were going. So what's Vote Common Good, Doug? How'd you get there?
Yeah, so
these are Doc's questions, but you're my guy today. So.
I'll take a back seat today.
I'm glad to tell both of you about it. Vote Common Good is a nonprofit organization that exists to reach out to faith voters, specifically the people that I know well, evangelicals and Catholics, mainly white evangelicals and white Catholics, who have found themselves, because of the systems and structures they've been in religiously, tied into a political ideology and political party that came as a package deal. For a lot of people, their religion and their politics were wedded together, and they didn't really feel like they had a choice. Sometimes in our world, we joke it was like you pulled up to the Wendy's and you ordered the number 2, and it just came with the fries, right? And you told yourself you weren't going to eat the fries, but you ate the fries, right? So a lot of people end up going to a church, say an evangelical church or other kinds, and they get into it and they believe in it and they join the people in their work and life in the world. And the next thing they know, there's a political agenda and ideology and commitment that goes with that. And for a lot of people, separating those two identities, their religious identity and commitments and beliefs, from their political identities and religion and belief, is really difficult, even when they're at odds. So what we've realized is this is an identity issue for people. Well, most things are identity issues. You talk to your therapist friends and they're like, a lot of issues people are dealing with. It's about the story we're telling ourselves and how we see ourselves in the world and all this. So what we did at Vote Common Good was to start an effort to specifically help people who were trying to separate their evangelical and Catholic or Christian identities from their Republican identity. Not because we were telling people we didn't want them to be Republicans. That was their choice, right? We were trying to help people who didn't want to be Republican and didn't know how to separate those two things from each other. So that was the struggle that people were having. And we met so many people along the way for whom they just couldn't figure out how to leave one behind without the other. And frankly, if they were going to have to give up their faith or give up their political aspirations, they're going to give up their politics. In other words, they're going to keep voting for some, because they're like, well, we all make excuses and rationalizations, reasons for what we do, right? And I don't use excuses and rationalizations lightly. They're really important. They're what they're what motivate us, to do all the things we do, both good and regretful in our lives. So that's what Vote Common Good is, essentially helping people decide if they want to separate those identities so that they can decide what they want to do and have more agency and more freedom to do it. And that's one of the themes that for me has just been really important all along, is that the human flourishing and human development requires a sense of agency, that people believe that their own sense of being can have an impact on what they do and how they are in the world. And if you can help people have more of a sense of connection to the beliefs that they hold, they tend to be more healthy people and put together better beliefs, right? It's just one of the things that works. And politics is not built that way. Boy, I'll tell you, I mean, we work with politics, and it is as binary as religion. It's as binary as sports cheering, for one or the other. And the way you see yourself is in opposition to the other. And, that's just a human developmental stage of recognizing oneself. And when you need to grow and develop, you have to create other ways of seeing yourself in the world. So that's what we're doing, is helping people find agency. The way we do that is both working with voters and working with politicians. So when we work with voters, we do a lot of media, we do a lot of communication, we try to help tell a story, we try to connect a community of people so that if someone's making a political or religious change of some kind, they know that there's some people they can be with. Because human beings are social creatures, and we are going to form ourselves into societies and communities, and we will be wrong before we want to be alone every single time. Like, there is just no doubt about it. And so we know that a lot of people need a group, a community, a narrative that helps them understand who they are now, especially if they've been demonizing the people that they're becoming. So if they were afraid of that group of people and now they're becoming that group of people, oh man, they're just like, I don't know how to tell the story of my life. So that's what we do. And big part of that is we travel the country. So that was a long wind up for this pitch.
No,
we get on buses and drive around the country and hold events in places where we know the kinds of people are that we want to talk to about all this.
I heard a lot of good things there. First, you talked about entrepreneurship, something that I'm about and also that I teach. But you also talked about something else, although you didn't use the term. You're doing community development. It's something else I teach and I do. And the fact is, what you are creating a safe space for those evangelicals who, in fact, don't want that right-wing political orientation. A safe space, so they can say, okay, yes, I can have my religious beliefs and still have a different set of political beliefs. And there's a place for me. I don't have to feel like I'm on the outside. And so you're giving them a sense of comfort so that they can actually be who they truly are. And that's a very important mission. It's also a very important service. And I applaud you for that. For sure. So now, where are you going? I mean, obviously it's 2024 coming up, but but where do you see your organization going for the?
We formed in 2018 as a direct response to what we saw happening with the election of Donald Trump, who could not have been elected without the overwhelming support of the kinds of communities that we're working with. And we noticed that Democrats had basically given up on reaching out to voters who fit the demographics that we like to work with. So we wanted to move in both areas. We wanted to help the democratic system at least ask for the votes of these people, not just ignore them, or worse yet, ask them to, not be part of what the Democratic agenda is up to. Because the Democratic Party doesn't have it figured out. The Democratic Party doesn't have all the answers. The party systems are supposed to serve the people and not the other way around. And they need to include the people from this community just as much as they include the people from all the communities. And we were trying to help them figure out how to do that. So that was a big piece of the work, is the real problem that came with Donald Trump. In some ways, when the coronavirus hit, and a lot of us watched public health officials come to the forefront, and we realized, hey, these public health officials have been doing this stuff for decades and decades, right? You just never heard of them or thought of them or didn't even know what public health was if you heard about it. And all of a sudden there's, an Anthony Fauci and a CDC director and all these people. And you were like, oh, in this emergency situation, because of this virus, the roles that these folks can play are really important. That became sort of an operative metaphor for how we understood what we were doing. Like, there was a particular political virus that hit the system with the election of Donald Trump. It wasn't totally novel. It had been around, but this strain of the coronavirus, that hit us in 2020 in the United States and around the world, and the political virus that hit us in 2016 was of a different making. It's not just the same thing. It's a little non-identical repetition. So it's similar to what we've seen before in our American history, but this one was also particular and unique and had some real unique threats to it that we thought our organization should address, should be working on. So after, the 2020 election, it became a question for us: how do we continue to operate in the world? Like, what's the best role for us? And then that became pretty clear with the next election, and now the continuation of the Trump movement to be a political leader. So we're staying engaged, and we know that this work that we're doing is not only related to stopping a particular virus, right? Like, we're in the community health world, if I can bend that or even
Stay
harder.
with it, yeah.
But we have to do that work a little differently. You can't keep the warning sirens going, partly because it doesn't work. People just stop paying attention to it. And also the people who do pay attention to it, it's not good for them, right? You can't stay on high alert.
Right, at this level all the time, right? Vibrating
you
because you're so concerned. Yeah.
Those of us who work in the nonprofit and social impact sectors of society, we know how potent it is to pull that emergency alarm.
Right.
And it's really easy to do that. And funders everyone responds well to that, but it's not good for
But you can't maintain it, right? You can't maintain it.
So we're trying to figure that out.
So Doug, this is a show that was created around the anti-racism and allyship movement. And it was part of the reason I was attracted to Vote Common Good to begin with, right? I'm a person of deep Christian faith, but I was seeing all this stuff out in the world and it just didn't feel right to me. Around the same time, I met Dr. Horton, and, I kind of, said, there's a different way. And it's the way you talk a lot. There's a different path. There's a different way to go about these things. You talk about white Christian nationalism, and in the 2 minutes we have left, can you explain that to folks and why it's so concerning and why it's really become your work, my work, and to try to beat this back? Because what is it?
Yeah, we use the phrase white Christian nationalism to describe the situation of this particular troubling movement in the United States that has a particular flavor to it. So it's a catch-all idea, but the basic notion is that the United States is fundamentally Christian in its orientation and is fundamentally white in its orientation. And from that white Christian beginnings, it then will welcome and include others, right? I was in a diversity training and online and heard the person say, how many of you are committed to diversity? Raise your hand in a little Zoom thing. Everyone does, because they're in this thing. And then the presenter said, so in your mind, when you say diverse, you mean diverse from what?
Right.
And when we all realized we meant diverse from white, he said, that's where we're going to start. And that's the root of what goes on in the United States. And that gets then wrapped with a religious narrative that it's not only white, but it's Christian. Christian is a certain kind of Christian. It's not only a certain kind of Christian, it's a certain male kind of Christian. And all of a sudden, here we go. And so dealing with so many of these societal issues, you begin to see how they come back to these other core narratives. And so white Christian nationalism, seeing the United States as that in that role with a special call from God to function in the world in a certain way, gives people permission for all kinds of other things that they never otherwise would do or stand for or stick with. So we try to help deconstruct that world. In other words, help people understand how it was made. We're not yet demolishing it, but we can show how it was put together so that people can see that these systems and structures were made by people and can be unraveled in certain times and in certain places with certain efforts. So
it's such important work, Doug, and it just even explaining it to people, I think, is part of that, is part of it, right? I mean, because you sort of hear it and you first hear it almost in passing, and you're like, as you just said, I'm white, I'm Christian, or Christian and that, all of these pieces taken individually, but then when you put it all together and you understand, the stew that it is and what it's doing to this country, that's when you say, I want to get on a bus and talk to people in Pennsylvania and make sure they do the right thing. Yeah. I mean, that's really truly it.
Truly. And we went to Pennsylvania because there was a particular threat of a person running for governor there. But I will say, not only do we get on buses, but we have curriculum for this, which is printable curriculum, video curriculum.
Please talk about that a little bit more. How can people get involved, Doug? Because I need to have you back, 10 more times, or people. So tell all the ways they can tune into what you're doing each day and what you've got going on and how.
Well, there's a lot. Yeah. So on our website, you can find all the stuff, which is votecommongood.com. There's curriculum there for individuals and groups to use. There's a podcast just around Christian nationalism. There's a number of videos. We do a regular ongoing podcast 3 or 4 days a week. We have lots of videos that come out, a whole set of resources that people can use to share these kinds of ideas and say to someone, hey, this is the kind of thing I've been thinking about too. And that's what we hear a lot, right? We hear people say, I am so glad to meet all of you. I've been thinking that too, right? That's
I heard it firsthand when I traveled with you. I heard it firsthand with people going, oh,
yeah, the woman who walked up with her kid at that small little event that we did in Hershey, Pennsylvania. She's like, I just live down the street, but this is exactly what I've been trying to say. And I couldn't find anybody. That's the way a lot of people feel. There's this, and look, the racial inclusion and I live in Minneapolis, so 2020 was poignant, and I hope and believe that it can be a year in which we look back and see a real pivot having happened. But I will also say that the forces that want to keep the kinds of structures that allowed Derek Chauvin to kill George Floyd with the use of his police badge, those forces that want to support that, they are also organizing and working.
Yes.
And so these movements of inclusion and movements of racial equity have a counter side to them as well that are equally as organized and aggressive and working. So there's a competition for the future of the hearts and minds of the people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Doug, first of all, I told you he was good, right?
Sorry for
very good. The interesting, that last thought you said in terms of there's a competition in the market of ideas, and so you have to continue to push on, continue to press on, continue to fight in order to actually bring about the positive social change that you're trying to achieve. Yeah. I want to applaud you and also encourage you to continue on, to push on. What you're doing is so needed, because the bottom line is when you start talking about white Christian nationalists, the only person that they're actually going to listen to is another white person.
Yes.
And so let's be frank. And what you're doing is actually the Lord's work.
Thank you.
Well, Doc, thank you very much.
Thank you for pointing that out, Dr. Horton. You're probably one of 2 or 3 white people we've ever had on this show. Yes. So there you have it.
Might be 2 or 3 too many, but thank you for having me.
At 7 o'clock and go, who's that guy? It's just not the normal guests we have, but what you're doing is so important. I know it becomes so meaningful to me. I know it can become more meaningful to so many people who watch this show each week. So Doug, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Please, if we can have you come back, especially as political season warms up and what your schedule is going to be and where you're going to be around the country, so that people can connect with you. once again, it's votecommongood.com. They're on all kinds of social media. My phone beeps when he goes up with one of his broadcasts, and I always catch a few minutes of it because they're talking about all kinds of really cool things, and it's good people talking about interesting things. I can't think of a better way to include something in your day. So thank you very much, Pastor Pagitt. This is fantastic. This is fantastic. Thank you very much. Dr. Horton, thank you. And thanks